Welcome back to Easy Case Channel, where we carefully examine the facts, follow the evidence, and shine a light on the cases that matter most. Tonight, we step into a mystery that's still unfolding, one that has gripped a family, a community, and a nation. Names, dates, timelines, digital traces, physical clues. We lay it all out so you can see the picture clearly. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on active investigations like this one. Let's begin. No one expected an 84-year-old widow living quietly in the Catalina Foothills to vanish into thin air. Yet on the 1st of February, 2026, that is exactly what happened to Nancy Ellen Guthrie. Blood on the doorstep, a pacemaker ripped out and left on the floor, her home disturbed, but her car, her phone, her wallet, and her medications all still in place. This is the mother of one of America's most recognizable journalists, Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of the Today Show, and the case has every hallmark of a meticulously planned abduction that has left law enforcement and the family desperate for answers 13 days later. Welcome to Easy Case Channel. We examine the facts, the timeline, and the evidence in the cases that matter most. This is the disappearance of Nancy Ellen Guthrie, and someone watching right now may hold the key to bringing her home. Nancy Ellen Guthrie was born on the 27th of January, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She lived a life defined by resilience and quiet strength. Widowed in 1988 when her husband Charles died suddenly of a heart attack at just 49 years old during a mining trip in Mexico, Nancy raised 3 children on her own. Those children are Annie, Savannah, and Cameron. She built a stable home for them, worked hard, and later moved to the Tucson area where she put down deep roots. For 17 years, she worked in public relations at the University of Arizona, a role that suited her sharp mind and warm personality. Everyone who knew her described her the same way: active in her church, fiercely loving, mentally sharp with no signs of dementia or confusion, though she did manage chronic heart conditions that required a pacemaker and daily medication. Without that pacemaker and those medications, her survival was at serious risk. She could walk perhaps 50 yards on her own, no more, which made the idea of her leaving voluntarily in the middle of the night almost impossible to believe. Nancy lived alone in a warm adobe home in the Catalina Foothills, an unincorporated area north of Tucson near East Skyline Drive and North Campbell Avenue. This placed the case under Pima County jurisdiction rather than Tucson police, a detail that would matter as the investigation unfolded. The neighborhood is peaceful, filled with longtime residents who look out for one another. Nancy's home reflected her life, comfortable, orderly, and full of the small touches that showed her faith and her love for family. Her dog, a loyal companion, stayed close and was known to be protective and alert. On the evening of the 31st of January, 2026, the night that would change everything, Nancy took an Uber at 5:32 in the evening to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. Annie is married to Tommaso Cion, a 50-year-old Italian-born man who teaches 6th grade and advanced placement biology at Oro Valley School. They live about 10 minutes away. The evening was described by everyone as completely uneventful, a normal family meal with no tension, no arguments, nothing out of the ordinary. At approximately 9:48 that night, Tommaso drove Nancy back to her home. The garage door opened at 9:48 and closed at 9:50. Tommaso left shortly after, and that was the last confirmed time anyone who loved her saw Nancy alive. She was alone in her house, settled in for the night, everything seemingly normal. All right, then the timeline of digital evidence begins to paint a chilling picture. At 1:47 in the morning on the 1st of February, Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera suddenly disconnected. Investigators later determined this was not a glitch. Someone had physically ripped it down from the wall. At 2:12 in the morning, even though the camera was offline, the system's residual sensors still detected movement inside or near the home. At 2:28 in the morning, the app connected to Nancy's pacemaker lost connection with her phone. That moment marks the outer edge of the critical window. By then, Nancy was either unconscious, restrained, or already removed from the property. Her life-sustaining device was no longer communicating, and she was without the medical support she needed to stay stable. The next morning, The family grew concerned when Nancy missed a virtual church service she had planned to join with a friend. Family members arrived at her home around 11:56 in the morning. They found her phone, her wallet, her medications, her car, all exactly where they should be. Nancy herself was gone. At 12:03 in the afternoon, they called 911. Within hours, Pima County Sheriff's Department deputies were on scene. What they discovered turned this from a missing person report into a full criminal investigation almost immediately. By the 2nd of February, Sheriff Chris Nanos was speaking to reporters with a grave tone that sent chills through the community. He stated clearly that Nancy did not leave voluntarily. Given her limited mobility, she could not have walked far on her own. This was a crime scene. Evidence at the home told a story of struggle and injury, but not of uncontrolled violence. Nancy's blood, confirmed by DNA testing, was found on the front porch with a trail leading from inside the house toward the back door. The amount was not massive, not the kind associated with a prolonged or frenzied attack, but enough to show she had been hurt and had moved while bleeding. Droplets suggested she was upright or semi-upright as the blood fell. The pacemaker itself was found inside the home, forcibly detached rather than carefully removed by any medical professional. It had been left behind like it held no value, yet to Nancy it meant everything. Without it, her heart rhythm was at immediate risk. The fact that it was disconnected at 2:28 in the morning and left at the scene raised haunting questions about the intruder's knowledge of her vulnerabilities and their intent. All security cameras in and around the home had been disabled. The doorbell camera was not just covered or disabled remotely, it was torn from the wall. Internal cameras were smashed, yet the suspect had not cut power to the house or jammed signals. They went after each camera individually, which investigators noted as a sign of someone who knew the layout but may have been improvising under pressure. No forced entry at the doors or windows. Either Nancy opened the door herself to someone she trusted or knew, or the intruder had a key. At 84 years old, alone at 2 in the morning, with the idea that she would open the door suggests either deep familiarity with the person or that she was already incapacitated in some way before full entry. Her dog did not bark, another detail that pointed away from a random stranger. The animal was protective, yet it remained silent. That left two possibilities. The dog knew the intruder, or the intruder knew exactly how to keep the dog quiet. By the 2nd of February, the case had escalated rapidly. The Pima County Sheriff's Department was treating it as an abduction. Within a day, the FBI was heavily involved, deploying hundreds of agents, setting up a 24-hour command post, and bringing in specialists from Quantico for digital forensics, behavioral analysis, and crisis management. When the President of the United States personally offered additional federal resources after speaking with Savannah, a reward started at $50,000 and was soon doubled to $100,000. Digital billboards with Nancy's photo and a description of the suspect began appearing in major cities, including Los Angeles, Phoenix, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Albuquerque. Tips poured in, thousands upon thousands. But 13 days later, there were still no arrests, no body, and no confirmed proof of life. The family's public appeals began on the 4th of February. Savannah stepped away from her duties on the Today Show and even canceled her planned co-hosting of the 2026 Winter Olympics opening ceremonies. Flanked by her siblings, Annie and Cameron, she looked directly into the camera and spoke with exhausted but steady resolve. She described her mother as a kind, faithful, loyal, fiercely loving woman, a beautiful spirit who volunteered at her church and never missed a service. She begged whoever had her mother to please reach out just to let the family know Nancy was okay. That video spread quickly, millions of views across every platform. 3 days later, on the 7th of February, the tone shifted as the family acknowledged receiving a message. They said they understood and begged for Nancy's return, stating publicly that they were ready to pay whatever was asked. On the 9th of February, Savannah posted alone, her face showing the strain of sleepless nights. She called it their hour of desperation and renewed the plea for any information, when highlighting the $100,000 reward with no questions asked. On the 10th of February, the FBI released the first piece of surveillance footage that changed the public's understanding of the case. Black and white, grainy, captured at night, it showed a figure approaching Nancy's front door. The person was masked, gloved, carrying a backpack, and visibly armed with a holstered firearm. They reached up to cover the camera with one hand. Then when that failed, they pulled a plant from a nearby planter and shoved it in front of the lens before tearing the entire camera off the wall. The movements were deliberate but not flawless. FBI video forensic analysts later recreated the exact nighttime lighting conditions in a blackout tent at the home. They used mannequins, replica clothing, and precise measurements against the doorframe, porch railing, and planter to determine the suspect was a male approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build, wearing a black ski mask, vinyl gloves, and a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a Walmart exclusive brand that is inexpensive and widely available, making it nearly impossible to trace to a single buyer. That footage also prompted neighbors to come forward with additional sightings. Around 1:52 in the morning on the same night, a figure in a gray hoodie and jeans carrying 2 backpacks was seen about 4 miles from Nancy's home. Investigators were examining whether this could be the same person moving into or away from position. Black gloves were later recovered roughly 1.5 miles from the home and sent for DNA analysis. The results had not been made public by the 13th day, but the discovery was considered potentially critical. The FBI also asked neighbors for any surveillance footage from 2 very specific earlier windows. The 11th of January, between 9 in the evening and midnight, and the morning of the 31st of January, between 9:30 and 11 in the morning. Those requests suggested the suspect may have been conducting pre-surveillance on the home 3 weeks before the abduction and possibly confirming details on the day itself. 13 days into the investigation, the case remained wide open. No arrests had been made. Nancy was still missing, and without her pacemaker and medications since the early hours of the 1st of February. Sheriff Nanos had emphasized from the beginning that she could not survive long without medical intervention. The family continued to maintain hope that she was alive and expressed willingness to meet any legitimate demands. The community rallied with a candlelight vigil on the 4th of February at St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church, Nancy's church, where more than 400 to 500 people gathered to pray and leave flowers and notes at her home. Yellow ribbons appeared throughout the Catalina Foothills. Yet behind the public unity, the investigation faced challenges, including the jurisdictional dynamics between local authorities and the FBI, which we will explore further as the facts unfold. The digital evidence extracted by the FBI working directly with Google engineers proved especially valuable. Even after the doorbell camera was physically destroyed, residual data and back-end systems retained fragments that confirmed the exact sequence of events. Internal home cameras had been smashed, but timestamps and partial data helped establish the intrusion window. The lack of forced entry combined with the dog's silence pointed investigators towards someone with knowledge of Nancy's routine, her home layout, and her vulnerabilities. This was not a crime of random opportunity. Whoever took Nancy knew she would be home alone after dinner that night. They knew her schedule well enough to act in the dead of night when the neighborhood was quiet. They knew about the cameras and targeted them specifically. And they knew about the pacemaker and left it behind in a way that suggested both control and perhaps a message. As the days passed, the family's appeals grew more urgent. On the 12th of February, Savannah shared a home video montage of Nancy smiling, laughing at family dinners, at church, living the full, beautiful life that had been interrupted so violently. Her caption was simple and heartbreaking. "Our lovely mom, we will never give up on her." Through it all, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron have cooperated fully with investigators while navigating the intense media spotlight and the emotional toll of not knowing. The president's direct involvement and the FBI's substantial resources showed how seriously the case was being taken at the highest levels. Yet 13 days in, the central questions remained unanswered. Where was Nancy? Was she still alive? Who had taken her, and why? The evidence at the scene, the blood trail, the disabled medical device, the destroyed cameras, and the masked figure on video all pointed to a planned act by someone who came prepared but may have left behind the small mistakes that could eventually lead to an identification. The Ozark Trail backpack detail became a focal point because it is common, sold at Walmart, and matches the description of what the figure in the gray hoodie was carrying in the separate sighting 4 miles away. The gloves recovered along the likely escape route were another tangible lead. If DNA from sweat or skin cells inside those gloves matched anyone in the system, or could be compared to a person of interest, it could break the case wide open. The blood droplets on the porch and the path toward the back door suggested Nancy had been mobile enough to move while injured, perhaps being led or guided out of the home rather than carried unconscious, which would have left different transfer patterns. The limited volume of blood indicated the injury was not immediately life-threatening in a violent sense, but combined with the missing pacemaker and medications, every hour that passed increased the danger to her life. Investigators noted that the suspect's approach to the camera showed a mix of preparation and improvisation. They tried covering it with a hand first, then used the plant, then ripped the device down entirely. A true professional might have disabled the system from a distance or avoided the front door altogether. And this behavior suggested someone who knew enough to target the cameras, but was reacting in the moment when initial attempts failed. The fact that they carried a holstered firearm visible in the footage indicated they came ready to control the situation by force if necessary. Yet the dog did not react aggressively, which continued to suggest prior familiarity or a method to silence the animal without alarm. No one in the neighborhood reported hearing screams or loud disturbances, pointing to a quick, controlled removal rather than a chaotic struggle. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI were following every lead. 18,000 tips had come into local authorities, and another 13,000 to the FBI. Agents were canvassing door to door, reviewing surveillance from surrounding homes and businesses, and analyzing cell phone data. The request for footage from the 11th of January and the morning of the 31st suggested the suspect had been in the area multiple times, casing the property, timing routines, and ensuring Nancy would be alone. This level of planning ruled out a spur-of-the-moment crime. It spoke to patience and obsession, someone who had studied Nancy's life closely enough to know when the moment was right. The family's willingness to pay ransom, publicly stated in their videos, showed their desperation and hope that Nancy was still alive and could be returned safely. As the 13th day ended, the case stood at a crossroads. The evidence collected so far painted a picture of a targeted abduction by someone with inside knowledge, yet no suspect had been named and no arrest made. Nancy's blood confirmed injury and movement. The pacemaker confirmed deliberate interference with her medical needs. The cameras confirmed an intruder who knew exactly where they were located. The masked figure on video gave a physical description and a glimpse of methodical but imperfect execution. The community's support, the federal resources, and the family's unwavering pleas all converged on one goal: bring Nancy home. 13 days had passed since that garage door closed at 9:50 on the 31st of January. 13 days since Nancy was last seen safe. 13 days of searching, analyzing, and hoping against the grim statistics that say time is not on the victim's side in cases like this. Yet the family refused to give up. Savannah, a seasoned journalist who had spent her career asking the tough questions, now found herself living the story no one wants to tell. She and her siblings continued to post, to speak, to beg for information or contact. They believed their mother was still alive, and they were ready to do whatever it took to secure her safe return. The investigation continued around the clock. Forensic teams examined every inch of the home a second time after an initial release to the family that required re-entry for additional evidence. Digital experts pulled every possible byte of data from the Nest systems. Behavioral analysts built profiles based on the suspect's actions. And somewhere out there, the person responsible for taking an 84-year-old woman from her peaceful home in the middle of the night remained at large, possibly watching the news, possibly monitoring the pleas, possibly still holding Nancy against her will. This is where the case stood on the 13th day. The facts were clear, the evidence mounting, but the answers still out of reach. The blood on the doorstep had dried. The pacemaker sat in evidence. The doorbell camera lay in pieces, and Nancy Ellen Guthrie was still missing. The search would not stop. The family would not stop. And on Easy Case Channel, we will continue to follow every development with the respect and attention this case deserves. If you have any information, no matter how small, the tip lines are open 24 hours a day. The $100,000 reward is available with no questions asked. Someone knows what happened in those critical hours after 9:50 on the 31st of January, 2026. Someone saw the figure in the gray hoodie carrying backpacks at 1:52 in the morning. Someone may recognize the build, the backpack, or the movements in that grainy doorbell footage. That someone could be the reason Nancy comes home. We have only scratched the surface of the evidence, the digital forensics, the ransom communications that surfaced, the jurisdictional details that complicated the lab work, and the deeper questions surrounding opportunity, motive, and the people closest to Nancy. Those elements will unfold in the parts to come as we piece together this ongoing mystery without speculation beyond what the verified facts support. For now, remember Nancy Ellen Guthrie, 84 years old, a mother, grandmother, church volunteer, and beloved community member who disappeared from her own home in the dead of night. Her story is not over. The investigation is active, the tips are still coming in, and the hope remains that she will be found safe. If this video helped you understand the timeline and the key evidence in this heartbreaking case, please like, comment with your thoughts on what stands out most to you so far, and hit the subscribe button with notifications turned on so you never miss the next part of this unfolding story or any other deep dives on Easy Case channel. Your support keeps these important cases in the spotlight and helps bring awareness that can lead to real breakthroughs. Thank you for watching. The release of that grainy doorbell footage on the 10th of February, 2026 marked a turning point in how the public and investigators viewed the abduction of Nancy Ellen Guthrie. Up until that moment, the case had been described through words alone. Blood droplets on the porch, a forcibly detached pacemaker left behind, cameras destroyed, no forced entry. But seeing the masked figure approach the front door in the dead of night, methodically yet imperfectly trying to obscure the lens before ripping the entire device from the wall, brought the reality into sharp, unsettling focus. This was not a ghost or a vague shadow. This was a person who walked up to Nancy's home carrying a backpack, visibly armed, and executed a plan that had clearly been thought through, even if the execution showed cracks under pressure. The FBI's Video Forensic Analysis Unit did not simply enhance the footage and move on. They treated the clip like a crime scene in miniature. Agents returned to Nancy's home after dark and constructed a blackout tent over the front porch to eliminate any stray ambient light from street lamps or neighboring properties. They recreated the exact conditions captured at roughly 1:47 in the morning when the camera was still active. Mannequins were dressed in clothing matching the visible elements: dark attire, black ski mask, vinyl gloves. Different heights and builds were tested. The backpack was replicated in size and shape. A 25-liter black Ozark Trail hiker pack, the kind sold exclusively at Walmart for under $30, common enough that thousands of identical units exist across the country. Proportions were measured against fixed reference points in the frame: the height of the door frame, the position of the porch railing, down to the base of the planter that the suspect eventually used to block the lens. From those painstaking comparisons, the official suspect description emerged: male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build, deliberate but not polished in his movements. What stood out to multiple former FBI agents who reviewed the footage independently was the progression of decisions the suspect made in real time. First, he reaches up with one gloved hand to cover the camera. That fails because the wide-angle lens captures too much of the porch. Next, he turns to a nearby planter, yanks out a live plant, and shoves it directly in front of the lens. That partially obscures the view, but not enough. Only then does he grip the camera housing and tear it free from the wall with visible force. That sequence, try, adjust, want to escalate, reads as reactive problem-solving rather than a rehearsed flawless disablement. A seasoned operator might have approached from a blind angle, cut external power at the breaker box outside, or used a jammer to knock out Wi-Fi before ever stepping into frame. This person did none of those things. He walked straight to the front door, stood fully exposed for several seconds, and improvised when his first two attempts fell short. That suggested someone who had done homework on the camera's locations, but lacked experience in overriding them under live conditions. The holstered firearm visible on the suspect's hip added another layer of intent. This was not someone relying on surprise or intimidation alone. They came prepared to use lethal force if necessary. Yet the limited blood evidence at the scene and the nature of the blood trail, individual droplets rather than smears or heavy pooling, implied the injury to Nancy was not from a shooting or prolonged beating. It pointed more toward a single strike, perhaps to subdue her quickly, or incidental trauma during restraint or removal of the pacemaker. The blood droplets leading from inside toward the back door suggested she was still on her feet, or at least semi-mobile, as she was moved through the house and out an exit that offered more concealment than the front. The back door faced a fenced yard and darker landscaping, reducing the chance of immediate neighbor observation. That same day the footage was released, additional witness accounts surfaced that aligned disturbingly well with the timeline. Around 1:52 in the morning, less than an hour before the camera was disabled and roughly 36 minutes before the pacemaker app lost connection, a separate surveillance camera about 4 miles from Nancy's home captured a figure in a gray hoodie and jeans carrying 2 backpacks. The sighting was fleeting, the image low resolution, but the description matched the build and general attire of the doorbell suspect. Investigators immediately began comparing the two figures, frame by frame. Was this the same person moving toward or away from the target location? If so, the 2 backpacks raised new questions. One could have been the Ozark Trail pack seen later at the door. What was in the second? Tools for disabling cameras, restraints, medical supplies if the kidnapper anticipated dealing with the pacemaker, or perhaps evidence of premeditation, gloves, mask, weapon, all staged for quick disposal after the act. The black gloves recovered roughly 1.5 miles from the home took on even greater significance once tied to this potential escape route. They were not found in a dumpster or buried. They were discarded along a roadside or in a semi-visible area where a passerby or patrol could spot them. Inside those gloves, if any sweat, skin cells, or trace DNA remained, lay one of the strongest potential leads in the entire case. The FBI pushed hard for expedited processing at their National Crime Lab in Quantico, where the most advanced forensic capabilities in the country could run the samples through CODIS and generate a hit if the wearer had ever been in the system. Yet, as we will see later, that push met resistance from local jurisdiction, creating a delay that frustrated federal agents and former prosecutors who spoke publicly about the risks of waiting. The Ransom communications that began surfacing within 48 hours of the abduction added another dimension of complexity. The first appeared around the 2nd or 3rd of February when emails arrived at TMZ and 2 Tucson television stations, K-Old and K-Gun. The messages demanded $6 million in Bitcoin sent to a specified wallet address, with an initial deadline of 5 in the evening on the 5th of February. That deadline passed without further contact or proof of life. A second deadline was set for the 9th of February. It too expired in silence. No verified follow-up instructions arrived, no escalation of threats, no photographs or audio to confirm Nancy was still breathing. Law enforcement and independent analysts examined the emails closely. One retired FBI profiler noted the repeated use of the abbreviation USD when referring to the dollar amount of the demand. In everyday American English, people simply say dollars or $6 million. The formal USD phrasing suggested either a non-native speaker, someone accustomed to international financial contexts, or a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators into thinking the author was foreign. Bitcoin itself, while offering a degree of anonymity compared to traditional bank transfers, is far from untraceable. Every transaction lives forever on the public blockchain. Federal agencies have sophisticated tools to cluster wallets, trace flows to exchanges, and subpoena identifying information when funds are converted to fiat currency. Anyone sophisticated enough to set up a ransom wallet should have known that demanding Bitcoin would eventually leave a digital trail. The lack of follow-through after the deadlines passed raised doubts about whether the notes were genuine or opportunistic attempts by outsiders to exploit the family's desperation. At least one transaction to the original wallet address was confirmed by the Guthrie family around 5 in the evening on the 11th of February, but the amount was never disclosed publicly. Was it a partial payment made in hope? A test transaction? or something else entirely? Without more detail, the transaction remained another thread in an already tangled web. One arrest did occur in connection with the ransom messages, but it quickly ruled out the person as the actual kidnapper. On the 4th of February, the same day the family released their first joint video plea, a 42-year-old man named Derek Colella from Hawthorne Hills, California, sent fake ransom texts to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Sion. The messages claimed the sender was waiting for a Bitcoin transaction and asked if the family had sent it yet. Authorities traced the VoIP number back to Colella's Gmail account and home address. When interviewed, he admitted he had been following the case on television and pulled family contact information from a public cyber database. He had no involvement in the abduction and possessed no knowledge of Nancy's whereabouts. He was charged federally with transmitting a demand for ransom in interstate commerce and misuse of a telecommunications device. Colella appeared in court in Santa Ana on the 6th of February and later in Tucson on the 13th. He was released on $20,000 bond with electronic monitoring and travel restrictions pending trial. The FBI labeled him a grief profiteer, and records showed this was not his first brush with fraud. He had been named in a previous scheme involving stolen unemployment benefits. His arrest served as a reminder that high-profile tragedies attract parasites, but it did nothing to advance the search for the person who actually took Nancy. Meanwhile, the family's public statements evolved with each passing day of silence. On the 7th of February, in their second video, they directly addressed the kidnapper. "We received your message and we understand. We know what you want. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us and we will pay." The language was careful yet unmistakable. They were signaling cooperation and readiness to meet demands if it meant Nancy's safe return. By the 9th, Savannah appeared alone, visibly worn, describing the moment as their hour of desperation and renewing the call for tips with the doubled reward prominently mentioned. On the 10th, after the FBI released the doorbell footage, she reposted it with a single line that cut through the noise. "Someone out there recognizes this person." The simplicity of that statement carried enormous weight. She was not speculating about motive or identity. She was asking the public to look at the figure on screen and search their memory for anything familiar. The posture, the backpack, the way the suspect moved. And the 12th of February brought an emotional shift with the release of a home video montage. Clips of Nancy laughing at family gatherings, smiling in her church pew, hugging grandchildren, volunteering at events. Ordinary moments of an ordinary life that had been interrupted in the most extraordinary and cruel way. Savannah's caption beneath the post read simply, "Our lovely mom. We will never give up on her." These videos were not staged for sympathy. They were raw expressions of love and refusal to let hope die. Savannah had stepped completely away from her professional life. No Today Show appearances, no Olympics coverage, nothing but the singular focus of finding her mother. Her siblings followed a similar path, though Annie's public presence remained noticeably limited. A detail that fueled online discussion but lacked any official explanation from law enforcement. The community response remained strong. The candlelight vigil at St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church on the 4th of February drew hundreds who filled the pews and spilled outside, holding candles and praying for a woman many had known personally through church activities. Flowers and handwritten notes accumulated at Nancy's front gate. Yellow ribbons tied to mailboxes and trees became a quiet symbol of solidarity across the Catalina Foothills. Yet beneath the surface of that unity, the investigation faced mounting friction. The FBI had taken operational lead in many respects. Command post, digital forensics partnership with Google, behavioral profiling, a nationwide tip coordination. But primary jurisdiction remained with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. That distinction would soon become a source of public controversy, particularly around the handling of physical evidence, like the recovered gloves and crime scene DNA samples. 13 days had now passed since the garage door closed at 9:50 on the 31st of January. Nancy had been without her pacemaker and heart medications for over 300 hours. Medical experts consulted by investigators reiterated the grim reality. An 84-year-old woman with chronic cardiac issues could not sustain normal heart function indefinitely under those conditions. Even if the kidnapper provided food, water, and shelter, The absence of her daily regimen placed her at escalating risk of arrhythmia, heart failure, or sudden cardiac events. The family clung to the possibility that the abductor had some medical knowledge or access to replacement supplies, but no proof of life had surfaced to support that hope. No photograph, no short video clip, no audio of Nancy's voice confirming she was still breathing. In legitimate ransom cases, proof of life is standard leverage. Its absence here was one of the most troubling signs investigators tracked privately. The suspect description released by the FBI on the 12th of February narrowed the physical profile but left the pool enormous. 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10, average build, male, masked and gloved. The Ozark Trail backpack offered no traceability on its own. The holstered firearm suggested access to a weapon, but no make or model could be discerned from the grainy night footage. Witnesses who reported the gray hoodie figure with 2 backpacks 4 miles away could not provide additional identifying details beyond general clothing and the fact that the person appeared purposeful, not casual. The gloves, if processed quickly, remain the most promising forensic opportunity. Sweat DNA from the interior palm or fingers could yield a profile. If that profile matched anyone already interviewed or surfaced through tip investigation, an arrest could follow swiftly. But the gloves sat in evidence storage awaiting a decision on lab destination, a delay that former federal officials publicly criticized as unacceptable when a life hung in the balance. The January 11th surveillance request, from 9 in the evening to midnight, 3 weeks before the abduction, hinted at early reconnaissance. And perhaps the suspect walked the neighborhood that night, noting camera positions, timing when lights went out in nearby homes, observing Nancy's routine. The morning of the 31st, from 9:30 to 11, suggested a final check-in. Maybe confirming Nancy was home before the dinner plans unfolded. Maybe watching Tommaso's vehicle arrive and depart later that evening. Those specific time windows told investigators the crime had roots stretching back weeks, not hours. Patience like that usually indicates personal connection or deep fixation. Random abductions of elderly victims rarely involve such advanced observation. Yet the amateurish handling of the cameras at the moment of entry clashed with that premeditation. It created a behavioral puzzle, calculated in planning, clumsy in execution. As Part 2 closes, the case remained anchored in those contradictions. A suspect who knew enough to strike when Nancy was alone, but fumbled the most basic countermeasures against modern security. A demand for millions in cryptocurrency that lacked follow-through. A family willing to pay, yet receiving only silence in return. Evidence piling up. Blood, DNA, potential in the gloves, residual digital traces, witness sightings, yet no breakthrough arrest. The FBI continued its massive effort. Agents knocking on doors, analysts mapping cell tower pings, K-9 teams sweeping desert areas, helicopters covering wide grids. Tips reached over 31,000 combined. Somewhere in that volume, or in the forensic work still pending, the key waited. Nancy Ellen Guthrie remained missing, her fate unknown, her family still pleading into cameras that broadcast their pain to millions. The masked figure on that doorbell clip had become the face of the mystery, and someone somewhere had to recognize him. If this deeper look at the footage analysis, the ransom complications, and the evolving family appeals has kept you locked in, please like the video to help spread awareness, drop a comment with what details struck you most from this part, and hit that subscribe button with notifications on so you don't miss Part 3 when it drops. Easy Case Channel is here for every update in this active investigation. Thank you for staying with us. We continue the search for Nancy. The jurisdictional tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally broke into public view around the 12th of February 2026, when Reuters published a detailed report on the standoff over evidence processing. The FBI had been pressing to send the recovered black gloves and select DNA samples from the crime scene, blood droplets, trace material near the pacemaker, possible touch DNA on door handles, to their National Crime Lab in Quantico, Virginia. That facility represents the gold standard for forensic analysis in the United States, with unmatched capabilities for extracting low-level DNA, running rapid CODIS comparisons, and cross-referencing with national databases. Federal officials argued that speed was critical. Nancy Guthrie had already been without her pacemaker and heart medications for 11 days at that point, and every hour increased the medical urgency. Sending the evidence to Quantico could shave days or even weeks off turnaround time compared to other labs. Sheriff Chris Nanos, however, refused. He insisted that all physical evidence remain consistent by going to the same contracted private laboratory, DNA Labs International in Fort Myers, Florida. Pima County had an existing agreement with the lab, and Nanos cited the need for uniformity in chain of custody and reporting. The cost to the county was reported around $200,000 for the full suite of testing. To the FBI and outside observers, the decision looked indefensible. Former federal prosecutors appeared on cable news calling it bureaucratic ego at the expense of a vulnerable life. Nancy Grace described the refusal as unconscionable. Megyn Kelly devoted an entire segment to the implications. She questioning why local leadership would prioritize internal contracts over the nation's premier forensic resource when an 84-year-old woman's survival was measured in hours, not weeks. An unnamed federal source told Reuters the move risked further slowing a case that grew more desperate by the minute. Nanos pushed back in interviews, denying he was blocking the FBI outright. He framed his position as responsible stewardship. Keeping everything in one lab prevented discrepancies in methodology or interpretation that could weaken evidence in court later. Yet the optics were devastating. The gloves, potentially carrying the suspect's DNA from sweat or skin cells inside the cuffs, sat in county evidence storage while the debate continued. Degradation is a real factor. Biological material breaks down over time, especially if storage conditions are not ideal. Every day of delay raised the chance that viable DNA would be lost forever. Critics pointed to an earlier misstep. Shortly after the initial scene processing, the sheriff's department had released Nancy's home back to the family before completing a full forensic sweep. Investigators later had to re-enter to collect additional items, risking contamination and chain of custody questions. That sequence fueled the narrative that local handling was not keeping pace with the case's gravity. Despite the friction, the FBI pressed forward within its permitted scope. Agents maintained the 24-hour command post, coordinated the tip intake now exceeding 31,000 combined, and continued aggressive canvassing. They expanded digital billboards to more cities, ran targeted public service announcements, and worked with behavioral analysts to refine the suspect profile. The figure on the doorbell camera was not behaving like a career criminal. The improvised camera disablement, the failure to anticipate residual cloud data, the visible holster rather than concealed carry, all suggested inexperience. Former profilers noted that true professionals avoid front door approaches entirely, especially with visible cameras. The suspect had prior knowledge of the setup but reacted clumsily when Plan A failed. That amateur edge offered hope. Novices leave traces that veterans do not. The Ransom trail grew colder with each missed deadline. After the 9th of February passed without escalation, communication from the original sender ceased. No new instructions, no proof of life, no adjustment of terms. In the confirmed Bitcoin transaction on the 11th, amount undisclosed, remained unexplained. If the family had sent it as a gesture of good faith, they kept the details private. If it came from elsewhere, it added only noise. Linguistic review of the emails continued. Beyond the unusual USD abbreviation, analysts looked at syntax, vocabulary, and punctuation quirks. The phrasing felt slightly off, formal in places where casual American English would dominate, yet not consistently foreign. Some speculated the writer was attempting to disguise origin. Others saw it as the work of someone educated but not native to everyday U.S. vernacular. Without follow-up messages, however, the notes risked being classified as opportunistic fraud rather than genuine kidnapper contact. Family statements reflected mounting exhaustion and quiet frustration. Savannah's posts grew more personal yet restrained. She avoided speculation, never named individuals, and focused solely on Nancy's character and the plea for help. In one update, she wrote that she did not care about the why or the who or the how anymore. She just wanted her mom back. That raw simplicity resonated widely. Annie Guthrie remained almost entirely absent from public view. She appeared briefly in the initial joint video on the 4th of February, but did not speak in later releases. Her husband, Tommaso Cian, had not been seen publicly for over a week by mid-February and was conspicuously missing from every family appeal. Law enforcement had searched the couple's home twice, once on the 4th and again on the 8th, with forensic photography flashes visible inside and at least one vehicle towed from the property. Annie reportedly privatized or removed certain social media photos featuring Tommaso around that time. None of this meant Tommaso had been named a suspect or person of interest. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and FBI both stated repeatedly that no one had been officially identified in that capacity. Sheriff Nanos emphasized that no one had been ruled out, but no confirmed suspects existed either. Online speculation filled the vacuum aggressively. Threads compared Tommaso's height to the 5'9" to 5'10" description, often concluding he appeared taller based on public photos. Others fixated on his bandmate Dominic Evans from the Tucson group Early Black, pointing to physical resemblance and past legal issues. Those claims remained entirely unsubstantiated by any agency. No charges, no named interest, no corroboration from official sources. The same went for theories about financial motive tied to Tommaso's power of attorney over Nancy's affairs. Standard estate planning documents surfaced online and were mischaracterized as suspicious when legal reviewers called them routine. The absence of a unified family press conference stood out. High-profile cases typically feature one or more joint appearances where relatives stand together, read statements, and answer limited questions to project solidarity and keep the story dominant in headlines. Here, the appeals came in controlled video formats. Savannah with siblings early on, then solo, then montages. No live event, no Q&A, no extended family visible. Some attributed it to law enforcement guidance, avoiding unplanned questions that could compromise investigative strategy. Others saw a deeper fracture. If differing beliefs existed within the family about who might be responsible, standing shoulder to shoulder became impossible without risking visible tension. Annie's continued silence and Tommaso's invisibility amplified that perception, though no evidence supported any conclusion. By the 13th day, the FBI director appeared on national television, claiming substantial progress and multiple persons of interest under review. When pressed for specifics, he offered none, a standard move to protect active leads. President Trump had already spoken publicly several times, promising full federal support and predicting answers soon. Those statements boosted morale but delivered no visible breakthrough. The reward remained at $100,000. Tips continued flooding in. Hone and search efforts expanded. Cadaver dogs in abandoned structures, divers in nearby water bodies, ground teams in desert outskirts. Every abandoned property within reasonable driving distance from the Catalina Foothills received attention. Helicopters flew grid patterns. Nothing definitive surfaced. The medical reality loomed largest. Experts reiterated that Nancy's chronic conditions made prolonged survival without intervention improbable. Arrhythmia could strike without warning. Heart failure could progress rapidly. Even optimal conditions, shelter, hydration, basic care, would not compensate for missing critical medication long-term. The lack of proof of life after nearly 2 weeks weighed heavily. In genuine ransom scenarios, kidnappers typically provide evidence the victim lives to maintain leverage. Silence suggested either incompetence, panic, or the harsher possibility that no proof existed to give. Investigators prepared for both outcomes while publicly and privately operating under the assumption she could still be alive. The case had reached a precarious balance, mounting circumstantial evidence pointing to premeditation and personal knowledge, yet no arrest. The gloves, if tested promptly, could change everything. The vehicle sightings from January 11th and 31st mornings hinted at repeated presence in the neighborhood. The two-backpack figure at 1:52 in the morning offered a potential pre-positioning sighting. Each piece fit a puzzle of planning, yet the amateur elements, fumbling at the camera, dropping gloves carelessly, suggested vulnerability to mistakes. Someone knew Nancy's routine intimately. Someone exploited that knowledge in the small hours. Someone left just enough behind to taunt while staying hidden. 13 days in, the net had widened but not closed. The family's hope endured through daily pleas. The community's support held firm with ribbons and prayers. Law enforcement pushed despite internal friction, and the question that anchored every effort remained unchanged. Where was Nancy Ellen Guthrie? The masked figure on that doorbell footage had walked into her life and vanished with her. Somewhere that person, or someone who knew them, carried the answer. The investigation would not relent until it found them. If this examination of the jurisdictional challenges, the stalled forensic leads, the quiet family dynamics, and the persistent medical urgency has deepened your understanding of where the case stands. Please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about what frustrates you most in the investigation so far, and subscribe with notifications on for Part 4. Easy Case channel continues covering this active search for Nancy. Thank you for staying engaged. The silence from the ransom sender after the second missed deadline on the 9th of February 2026 became one of the most unsettling elements in the entire investigation. Genuine kidnappers who seek money almost always maintain pressure once deadlines pass. They send proof of harm, lower the demand, threaten escalation, or provide fresh instructions to keep the family engaged and fearful. Here, nothing. No new email, no follow-up call routed through burners or VoIP, no updated wallet address, no photograph of Nancy holding a current newspaper. That abrupt cutoff suggested several possibilities, each more troubling than the last. First, the notes may never have come from the actual abductor. Someone monitoring news coverage could have assembled the demands quickly. $6 million in Bitcoin, arbitrary deadlines, generic threats, and sent them hoping the family would bite and panic. The use of USD in the text, the rapid appearance within 48 hours of the abduction, and the lack of any personalized detail about Nancy all fit that pattern. Opportunistic fraudsters had already surfaced in the form of Derek Colella. Others could have tried the same tactic without ever having contact with Nancy. Second, if the notes were legitimate, the kidnapper may have become frightened by the scale of the response. Hundreds of FBI agents, presidential attention, national media saturation, a doubled reward, digital billboards in 5 major cities, 31,000 tips. The visibility alone could have caused a change of heart or a tactical retreat. A less experienced operator might have realized the net was too wide, the heat too intense, and decided to abandon the financial goal rather than risk capture during a handoff or proof-of-life delivery. Third and darkest, the silence could indicate that no further communication was possible because Nancy was no longer alive to provide proof. If the abduction had gone wrong, perhaps an unintended injury worsened by her age and heart condition, or if the kidnapper decided early that keeping her posed too great a risk, the motive for negotiation would evaporate. The initial notes could have been sent in the first flush of confidence, only for circumstances to shift fatally within hours or days. Without a body or credible contact, investigators had to weigh all 3 scenarios while publicly emphasizing the search for a living victim. Medical timelines grew more dire with each passing day. Cardiologists consulted by the task force explained that an 84-year-old with chronic heart issues, pacemaker dependent, faces compounding risks after missing medication and device function. The first few days might bring irregular rhythms or fatigue. Beyond 1 week, the likelihood of sustained arrhythmia or congestive failure rises sharply. By the 13th day, over 300 hours without support, survival without some form of intervention bordered on improbable, unless the abductor possessed medical supplies, knowledge of her regimen, and the willingness to administer it. No evidence suggested the kidnapper had that capability. The pacemaker, forcibly detached and abandoned at the scene, appeared intended to underscore vulnerability rather than to be repurposed elsewhere. Leaving it behind sent a message of control. I decide what keeps her alive. The behavioral profile built by FBI analysts leaned toward an amateur with personal ties rather than a career criminal or random predator. The front door approach, the hand, then plant, then rip sequence at the camera, the failure to disable power or Wi-Fi, the visible firearm instead of concealed, all pointed to someone who planned the entry, but not the technical countermeasures. Professionals prioritize invisibility. This suspect prioritized speed and directness. The dog's lack of alarm reinforced familiarity. An alert companion animal barks at strangers, especially at 2 in the morning. Silence implied recognition or preemptive neutralization, both requiring prior access to the home or knowledge of the pet. That familiarity directed scrutiny toward the inner circle, even as law enforcement avoided public naming. Tommaso Cian remained the last person confirmed to have seen Nancy alive when he dropped her off at 9:48 on the 31st of January. His power of attorney over her finances was standard for an aging parent, but placed him in a position of legal control. The two searches of his home with Annie, the impounded vehicle, the forensic lights inside the residence, Annie's removal of certain online photos featuring him, all occurred without any official statement labeling him a suspect. Height comparisons circulated online often claimed he exceeded the 5'9" to 5'10" range shown in the Doorbell recreation, though public photos vary in perspective and footwear. No agency ever confirmed or denied a match or exclusion. The absence of Tommaso from every family video appeal grew louder as the days passed. Savannah and Cameron appeared repeatedly, together, separately, with montages. Annie appeared only once, briefly in the initial plea on the 4th of February. Tommaso never. No statement, no visible support in the frame, no quote attributed to him in any release. Legal counsel may have advised complete silence to avoid misinterpretation or accidental disclosure. If he was cooperating privately, providing timelines, financial records, phone data, public visibility could complicate that. Alternatively, if investigators had developed interest, his absence protected against self-incrimination. The family never addressed the gap directly, leaving speculation to fill the void. Online communities dissected every available detail with relentless intensity. Threads compared clothing fibers visible in the Doorbell clip to items in Tommaso's band performance photos. Others mapped his known addresses against the 4-mile sighting of the gray hoodie figure with 2 backpacks. Dominic Evans, Tommaso's bandmate, became a recurring target due to build resemblance and a prior felony record. None of these lines produced official corroboration. Fact-checkers debunked fabricated claims, $50 million in gambling debt to a Mexican casino, forged power of attorney documents showing unusual transfers. The internet convicted quickly and rarely retracted. Investigative pressure points remained the unprocessed gloves and the pending vehicle identification from the January 11th and 31st surveillance requests. Neighbors had been asked for footage from those exact windows because investigators believed a suspicious vehicle or person appeared in the area during pre-abduction reconnaissance and on the day itself. A recurring dark sedan, light SUV, or pickup, if captured clearly, could yield a plate, make, model, or distinctive feature leading to an owner. Residential cameras rarely capture readable plates at distance, especially at night. But partial images combined with witness statements sometimes suffice. And the 4-mile backpack sighting at 1:52 in the morning suggested staging. Park far enough to avoid neighborhood recognition, walk in with gear, execute, walk out, or use secondary transport. Search operations intensified in parallel. K-9 teams swept vacant lots and abandoned structures within a 30-mile radius. Divers checked retention ponds and canals in the Catalina Foothills area. Ground teams combed desert fringes where a body could be concealed quickly. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew nightly patterns. None produced a confirmed hit by the 13th day, but the effort signaled commitment. The command post remained active. Analysts tracked blockchain flows from the Ransom wallet. Behavioral specialists refined motive typologies, financial, personal grudge, custodial control, revenge against Savannah through her mother. The family's public posture stayed resolute, yet increasingly strained. Savannah's posts emphasized endurance. We will never give up. She shared no theories, named no names, asked only for recognition of the masked figure or any overlooked detail. Community support persisted, more ribbons, more notes at the gate, prayer groups at St. Philip's. Yet beneath the solidarity, frustration simmered. Sources close to the family described grinding impatience with the pace of visible progress. No arrest, no verified contact, no body, only waiting. 13 days had stretched into a test of endurance for everyone involved. The evidence trail, blood movement patterns, pacemaker abandonment, camera disablement sequence, glove discard, Backpack sightings pointed to someone who knew Nancy well enough to exploit her isolation, but lacked the polish to vanish cleanly. The jurisdictional delay on forensics remained the single most criticized bottleneck. If the gloves yielded a profile and a database hit, identification could follow within hours. Until then, the case balanced on circumstantial threads and the faint hope that Nancy still breathed somewhere. The net had not closed, but it had tightened. Tips kept arriving. Agents kept knocking. The family kept pleading. And somewhere, the person who walked up that porch at 1:47 in the morning carried knowledge no one else possessed. The investigation would chase that knowledge until it ran out of ground to cover. If this exploration of the Ransom silence, medical urgency, behavioral indicators, family dynamics, and an active search efforts has kept you invested in Nancy's story, please like the video, leave a comment sharing which unanswered question bothers you most right now, and subscribe with notifications enabled for Part 5, the final segment of this ongoing coverage. Easy Case Channel remains committed to following every development. Thank you for watching. 13 days had stretched into what felt like an eternity for the Guthrie family, yet the investigation refused to stall. By the middle of February 2026, the FBI had quietly shifted emphasis toward the possibility that the abduction was not purely financial, but rooted in something more intimate: control, resentment, or a desire to disrupt the life of someone highly visible. The $6 million ransom figure, while enormous, began to look less like a realistic calculation and more like a symbolic number chosen for impact. Savannah Guthrie's public earnings were well known in media circles: network anchor salary, book advances, speaking engagements. $6 million represented a life-altering sum even for her, yet not impossible with asset liquidation. The kidnapper either overestimated the family's liquid cash or chose the amount deliberately to force a drawn-out negotiation that never materialized. Behavioral analysts revisited the abandonment of the pacemaker as a key psychological marker. Removing or disabling a life-sustaining device and leaving it behind is rarely pragmatic for a ransom operator. It creates unnecessary risk. If the victim dies quickly, leverage vanishes. Yet the device was detached forcibly and discarded at the scene like a taunt. That act suggested either indifference to Nancy's survival or a need to demonstrate power over her most vulnerable point. The limited blood trail supported a controlled injury rather than lethal violence, droplets indicating upright or semi-upright movement toward the back door. Not the heavy transfer expected if she had been carried unconscious or dragged aggressively. Someone guided or forced her out while she was still ambulatory enough to bleed in distinct drops. The back door exit offered tactical sense. It opened to a fenced yard with denser landscaping and less street exposure than the front porch. Neighbors reported no unusual vehicle activity immediately after the 2:28 disconnection timestamp, but the lack of noise, no screams, no barking escalation, reinforced the intruder's familiarity with the property and the dog. Pre-knowledge of the animal's temperament would allow quick calming or distraction, eliminating alarm. Combined with no forced entry, the picture hardened. This was someone Nancy might have recognized or trusted enough to open the door in the small hours, or someone who entered with a key obtained through prior access. Investigators had presumably accounted for every key holder: children, spouses, close friends, service providers, church acquaintances. Any missing or unreturned key would trigger immediate follow-up. The absence of reported key issues in public statements suggested either all keys were verified or the entry method bypassed physical locks altogether, perhaps social engineering or coercion before full intrusion. The January 11th 9 to midnight window and the 31st morning 9:30 to 11 request pointed to repeated visits. A vehicle or pedestrian presence during those periods could tie the suspect to pre-abduction surveillance. If the same dark sedan or light SUV appeared across multiple captures, it would become the investigative anchor. The 4-mile sighting at 1:52 in the morning remained a critical puzzle piece. The gray hoodie figure carrying 2 backpacks could represent staging, parking outside the immediate neighborhood to avoid recognition, approaching on foot with gear, executing, then retreating the same way, or switching transport. The second backpack's contents, possibly restraints, additional clothing for disguise change, or evidence disposal materials, would explain the need for extra capacity. Wonder if that figure matched the doorbell suspect's build and pack style. It placed him in motion roughly 36 minutes before the Pacemaker app lost connection, aligning with travel time on foot or short drive. Forensic delays continued to draw sharp criticism. The gloves found 1.5 miles away offered the clearest path to a DNA profile. Interior sweat or epithelial cells could produce a full or partial match in CODIS if the wearer had any prior law enforcement contact. Even without a database hit, a profile would allow comparison sampling from anyone interviewed or developed as a person of interest. The ongoing debate over Quantico versus the contracted Florida lab risked further degradation. Biological evidence is time-sensitive. Improper or prolonged storage accelerates breakdown. Former agents interviewed on news panels stressed that 24 to 48-hour expedited processing was standard in life-at-risk cases. The county's insistence on uniformity, while procedurally defensible, appeared increasingly out of step with the urgency. Tip volume had stabilized but remained high, over 31,000 combined. Most were earnest but unproductive. Sightings of older women in vehicles, vague recollections of suspicious persons weeks earlier, psychic visions. Investigators still chased every credible lead. Blockchain analysts monitored the original Ransom wallet for movement. If funds flowed to an exchange or mixer, subpoenas could reveal account holders. The single confirmed transaction on the 11th, amount undisclosed, stayed unexplained. A small test payment would fit family desperation, whilst a larger sum would have leaked as major news. Its opacity added another layer of uncertainty. Savannah Guthrie's final public posts in this period carried a tone of quiet defiance. She shared no new theories, avoided engaging speculation, and repeated the core message. Look at the footage, recognize something, come forward. Her decision to step away from the Today Show entirely signaled total commitment. No Winter Olympics coverage, no return to the anchor desk, only the search. Cameron appeared in supporting roles, but Annie's continued absence from new releases spoke volumes. Whether driven by grief, legal advice, or internal family strain, her silence and Tommaso's invisibility fueled endless online dissection. No agency had contradicted the repeated line, no name suspect, no person of interest publicly identified. Where community efforts persisted quietly. Yellow ribbons faded but remained tied to fences. Fresh flowers appeared at the gate despite the home's restricted access. Prayer circles at St. Philip's continued. The vigil's 400 to 500 attendees had dispersed, but the sentiment lingered. Nancy was one of theirs, a faithful volunteer whose sudden absence left a void in pews and potlucks alike. As the investigation entered its third week, the statistical reality loomed unavoidable. Elderly victims in stranger abductions rarely survive beyond the first 48 to 72 hours. Prolonged captivity requires resources, risk tolerance, and motive beyond quick gain. If this was personal, custodial leverage, family dispute resolution, targeted revenge, the calculus changed. Keeping Nancy alive could serve a longer objective. Yet the lack of proof of life eroded that hope daily. No audio, no photo, no verifiable sign she still breathed. The case had become a mosaic of contradictions, meticulous advance planning clashing with clumsy execution, a high ransom demand followed by total radio silence, intimate knowledge of routine paired with amateur countermeasures. The suspect had left traces, blood pattern, detached device, discarded gloves, potential surveillance sightings, yet stayed one step ahead. Every missed opportunity to process evidence faster, every jurisdictional hesitation, every unreturned call from a tip line narrowed the window. Nancy Ellen Guthrie remained missing. 84 years old, pacemaker dependent, medication reliant, last seen safe when the garage door closed at 9:50 on the 31st of January. Her blood marked a path toward the back door. Her dog stayed silent. Her cameras went dark. Her family begged on national television. And somewhere, the masked figure who tore down that doorbell camera carried the knowledge that could end this nightmare. The FBI, Pima County deputies, and federal resources would keep working. Tips would keep coming. Prayers would keep rising. The reward stood at $100,000, no questions asked. If you know anything, a vehicle you saw repeatedly in the Catalina Foothills, a person who changed behavior suddenly, A detail from the doorbell footage that nags at your memory? Call it in. Crime Stoppers, the Sheriff's Line, the FBI tip portal, all open 24 hours. This is not a cold case yet. It is active, urgent, and solvable. The evidence exists. The mistakes exist. When the person responsible exists. Time is against Nancy, but persistence is on her side. The Guthrie family has not given up. The community has not given up. And on Easy Case Channel, we will not give up either. We will follow every credible development until Nancy is found, alive or otherwise, and answers replace questions. Thank you for staying with this series through all 5 parts. If any piece of this coverage moved you, helped clarify the facts, or reminded you to stay vigilant, please like this final video, leave a comment with your thoughts on where you believe the breakthrough will come from, and subscribe with notifications turned on for future deep dives into cases that matter. Your engagement keeps these stories visible and can contribute to real awareness that solves real crimes. Thank you for watching Easy Case Channel. Comment your thoughts and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. If you know something, say something. The tip lines are in the description. Stay safe, everyone. We'll be back soon.